It's an old saying that sometimes in politics, nothing changes for decades, and then in 1 week, decades worth of change happens. And that is what's been happening in the world. But the major issues I want to discuss today are India's place in this changing world economically, as well as our sovereignty, in which so many deals have raised a lot of questions. Some of them, India is entering into a new era. Others question whether India is being firm enough, is standing its ground, is India giving too much. All that has to be discussed threadbare, and I'm very happy to discuss all these issues. I have been joined by Mr. Kanwal Sibal, none better than him to decode all these issues, sir. But sir, firstly, I want to discuss one big question which has arisen after India-US trade deal. We have not seen it. I do not know the fine print, and as we lawyers say, unless something is inked and every clause is discussed, it's all toilet paper. But whatever be there, one thing which came out of it is Russian oil and various views on it. One view was that India will no longer be buying Russian oil, and somehow it has not been communicated very well, or it's deliberately being left in a gray area. And I saw your tweet on this issue that such talk is creating ground for problems with the US and Russia going forward. On one hand, US wants to do future business with Russia, and on the other hand, wants India to stop doing present business with Russia, where I imagine you're talking about oil, no scruples involved. So, scruples aside, from Indian perspective, how important, firstly, is it a test of our sovereignty, how much oil we buy? Because one example says before 2022, we were not buying any oil. Whosoever gives the cheaper oil, we buy, and nothing much will turn on it. The other says quietly we'll keep buying 7, 8, 10%. The third says we will keep buying it. Fourth says we won't buy at all. So I do not know what the reality is, because some of the contracts will last till March. How do you see this entire debate, sir? Firstly, from a holistic purpose, and then secondly, how important is it for India? And whatever decision India takes on this debate, how will it affect our future course or relationships with Russia and US?
Well, let me say outright that we've been presented with a very difficult challenge. If you recall that we were asked to stop buying oil from Iran, and this was part of the nuclear deal, if you like, and we stopped buying oil from Iran, although Iran was next door, and at one time was our second biggest supplier of oil, and temporarily even the largest supplier of oil. But we sacrificed that, because in sacrificing that, our core interests were not hurt, because our overall relationship with Iran was relatively very limited. Now, when it comes to Russia, the picture is entirely different, because Russia is a very, very major partner, a long-term partner, a very steady partner, a trustworthy partner. We have tested Russia's uh, policies and thinking towards us over decades, and that has bred a certain degree of confidence. And of course, the fact that they, in the past, we need not romanticize the past, but in the past, they stood by us in the UN Security Council. That Bangladesh got created because of them, frankly, because they kept vetoing the moves in the UN Security Council. And then they helped build up our defense capabilities, and actually contributed to them in a very, very significant way in areas where no one else would would have would have actually transferred those kind of technologies and platforms to us. Uh, our biggest uh, in space, they have been extremely helpful. Uh, the only country that's building nuclear power plants in India is Russia. So they are in India in very strategic areas. Plus, for the balance of our foreign policy, it's very, very important that Russia remains our partner. Imagine if Russia goes out of the equation, then what do? We don't have a relationship with China. We are squarely in the lap of the West and the Americans. We have no choice, no option left. So we have to maintain this option. Have to maintain this option. Not only that, if our relationship with Russia becomes very distant and cold, and we see the phenomenon of Russia and China working together, then where are we left out? Where are we left? I mean, we have no locus left in the whole of Eurasia. especially with Iran also being in that camp. And we are an Asian power. And so we can't really distance ourselves. That's the reason why we are in the SCO and why we also want to have close ties with, continue to have close ties with Russia is because it helps us to balance Russia's relations with China. Russia also doesn't want to become over dependent on China. I mean, they are very fine geopoliticians, and they know that India can be also uh, a country with which they can try and balance their own relations with China in this triangle. So, on various fronts, the Russian relationship is very important and goes beyond the economic and the oil part. But even on the oil part, our largest investments abroad in oil is in Russia. And we've been looking at more and more opportunities to invest there. So uh, now, therefore, when America says you don't buy oil from Russia, it is a very difficult issue that has been created in our relations. Uh, and America has not held back its hands. I mean, they imposed 25% additional punitive tariffs on us. So their coercive policies on this are open and clear. They are not hidden. They're not hidden. And now, even after the framework agreement of the trade deal was signed, what does Mr. Trump do? He issues an executive order where he says that, first of all, he says that to justify why he's reducing tariffs to 18% is that Modi told him India is not going to buy Russian oil. Now, if Modi had told him not to buy Russian oil, then why did he issue the executive order to say
Of
that I've asked
monitoring, and I'll.
Treasury, Secretary of the USTR, and the Secretary of Commerce and the chap in the White House to monitor our direct or indirect purchase of Russian oil. Now, thing is, how do we deal with this? Now, if we were to then assert our sovereignty and our strategic autonomy, and to some extent, uh, how should I say, assert our self-respect. There can be the argument to say that we can say openly that this is a red line for us, that we are willing to have very close relations with the United States, but this cannot be contingent on the United States telling us how to conduct our relations with third countries, and especially very, very important countries, and especially with a permanent member of the Security Council. We have not done that because Trump is vengeful, because his ego is what it is, and we've been a bit traumatized by these 50% tariffs. It has hurt our economy, it has hurt investment flows, and therefore we are now playing it safe by not openly contradicting him, but using a formulation which is so broad, which which gives us a lot of latitude to do what we want. In the sense, we say we'll take our decisions based on prices, based on diversification, based on our energy needs, and based on geopolitical situation, etc., etc. So we are hedging, and we are keeping our options open. Why are we keeping our options open? I think there is this view or expectation that since Trump is dealing with the Russians on the Ukraine conflict, and if somehow progress is made there, and this some sanction relief is given to Russia, then maybe this issue will get out of the way. Maybe it'll get out of the way.
Let's say even the isn't the
But
other part. Sorry.
but the long and short is that it's not an easy situation for us, and we have to, in a way, balance what would be the cost we'll have to pay in openly defying Trump, uh, and in a sense, um, how should I say, sending a negative signal to Russia on an issue which has become very political. Because Russia, after all, we talk about strategic autonomy, we talk about the importance of our relations with Russia. And President Putin has said more than once that he admires India's, Modi's uh, uh, determination to pursue India's interests and that he doesn't subject himself to pressure. He said that. And now, in a sense, it's a test case.
Sir, exactly. Why is this a test case? Because before 22, we were not buying Russian oil. We had a very deep strategic relationship. Without oil, or if oil is reduced, now you think it has become a test case, and if we do not buy oil, the other parts which were good before 22, they would also come in jeopardy, because it will completely sour the relationship and we would come out as unreliable. Why is 22 different from 26? Why is oil
Couple,
so important?
a couple of things. You are right, absolutely, that before 2022, we were only buying 2% of our oil from Russia, though our investments in Russia energy sector, as I mentioned, were huge, the biggest that we have in any country. It is simply because it was not economical to buy Russian oil when we had oil next door in Iraq and Saudi Arabia and UAE, of course, Iran was there. Then the whole issue of sanctioning Russian oil and placing a price cap, uh, forcing Russia to offer discounts. And suddenly we found that the discounted Russian oil was cheaper than what we could get from Saudi Arabia or elsewhere. So we started buying Russian oil. And the American government itself asked us to do so. You see, Russia supplies 4.5 million tons of barrels, 4.5 million barrels of oil every day into the international market. There is no other country that can substitute for this volume if it goes out of the market. Saudi Arabia can do a little bit, Venezuela can do a little bit, but very little. But there is no excess capacity that can come into the market. Therefore, the prices will shoot up. It won't even help the United States. That is why the American government was advising us to keep buying discounted Russian oil, and Europe was happily buying refined products that we were making from Russian oil. Now, uh, the what now Trump is saying is that, contrary to what the Biden administration said, that keep buying Russian oil to keep the oil prices steady. Trump is saying no, you stop buying Russian oil. Uh, Now, if Russian oil is still discounted and it is very attractive, uh, we have a dilemma. There are some Russian companies which have not been sanctioned by the United States, and if their oil at discounted prices comes into the spot market, we'll buy it. Even after April or March or April, we'll buy it. It'll be reduced volume, but we'll buy it. But our private sector people, Reliance and others, they will have to be extremely careful, because then if they are subject to US financial sanctions and their business empire goes far beyond oil, and they have to have access to the US financial system, the banking and everything else. And even our public sector companies will have to be careful. So there is an issue. There is a complete uh, blackmail by the United States through the power of the dollar uh, and the control of the international financial system, uh, to force other countries, coerce other countries to do what they want. Now, this is a challenge. This is a challenge for us. Now, the other question, how it will affect, could affect our relations with Russia. Now, I would say that if Trump had not put these kind of overt blackmail tactics, uh, coercive tactics against India on Russian oil, and if on the basis of price factors and other things, we did not find the Russian oil any more attractive, we would have stopped buying it. It would not be a political issue. It will be a purely economic issue, and the Russians would not make that much of a fuss. But now that the Americans have politicized the issue to this extent, that even if we were to take a rational economic step, it'll look as if we are yielding to blackmail. And that's where the Russians will test us. And
Hmm.
that's where the problem is. So will it affect even if we did so under coercion? I have a view.
Hmm.
Two things. First of all, the Russians are very well aware themselves of how unpredictable Trump is and how difficult it is to deal with him. And therefore, they will appreciate and understand our dilemma at one level, on a realistic basis. Then look, we know your heart is not in it, but we know what your problem is with this guy. Huh? That's one part. The other is, at the moment, Russia has got his back against the wall. And therefore, even if they are hurt, they're angry, they'll swallow it in order to bide their time and keep India on their side. Keep India on their side. Because in the larger eastward policy of Russia, which has been forced upon them, India is a critical factor. And that larger issue of Russia, India, China, RIC, of BRICS and SCO, everything else will determine Russia's overall approach towards India, even if they're unhappy with what India does. So this is my own view. This is my own view.
So, in that sense, Russian decision becomes the most important decision to navigate for India with the US. But the last part I want to come to European deal, and specifically, I found very interesting where you tweeted something of Germany having a nuclear button, possibly, and rearming itself. And in line with India buying submarines from Germany, dockyard going on, Rafale, French president is in India, and you're doing 114 Rafale, which is a massive, massive deal, 3 lakh 25,000 crores, and etc. So, how do you and why has this India EU thing? How do you see it progressing, developing? Is it just a temporary reaction to US tariffs, where European Union, which had not signed a deal for 20 years, came on table, and then they will have non-tariff barriers, which are plenty there? Or do you think there is a substantial change, dehors what US does in future, where India European Union partnership gets deeper, especially with its economic powers, Germany and France?
Well, the I have the impression, and more than an impression, that Europe now is convinced that there is now and will be a structural problem in U.S. Europe relations, even after Trump disappears from the scene, and therefore Europe has to develop independent role for itself, uh, independent strategy, how it deals with the rest of the world, uh, and not rely entirely on America as they've done in the past. They have to find new partners. Now, when they look at the possibility of new partners, uh, who do they see? China is an obvious partner, but there are huge problems there because China may be a partner, but it is a suffocating partner, and they can't cope with competition from China. And now the Chinese competition is in the areas in which Europe wants to forge ahead. The all the advanced technologies, the critical technologies, emerging technologies, semiconductors, what have you, rare earths and stuff like that. Uh, and apart from the fact that uh, they don't want to depend on China, and they've had experience of this. Everybody has that experience. Now, who do then have as an alternative? India. India is rising. India's economic growth is a real story. The size of our economy, forget the GDP part, the size of the economy is growing. We are already the fourth largest, very shortly the third largest economy. We have certain strengths in areas where Europe is interested. Our human talent, our capacity to scale cooperation in the most advanced areas uh, is there, and they see it. So They would like, therefore, to strengthen their foothold into the Indian market. And that has pushed the FTA with India. Now, it's not as if the FTA was not being negotiated uh, prior to Trump. In fact, after Antonio Costa was the president of the took the presidency of the European Union, he revived the dialogue, the trade negotiations with India, which had gone into a limbo after 2007 or 9 or something, whatever it is, and revived them. And then since then, we've been having regular rounds of meetings. But what one can say is that the last stretch has been accelerated, and compromises have been found in order to strike the deal, where Europe has given up some of its demands and we have given up some of our demands, and we found a common ground and gone ahead and signed the FTA. To that extent, it is being pushed by Europe's problems with the United States. Um, it will be very, very beneficial to us and to Europe, because Europe is our second biggest trade partner, $130 billion of bilateral trade. We have roughly a balanced trade between the two countries. It is a very sizable market. It is a high consumption market. We can sell our goods there. So it opens up very good perspectives for us and for them too. I will not go into the details of what they can get out of the deal from us. Um, the I don't think there is any real problem that I see in terms of moving ahead in this area. You talked about regulation and everything else.
And non-tariff barriers, because there Europe historically has had. I was talking to certain people who businessmen who work there and all. They said the biggest problem in Europe, those who are doing business at a scale, has always been their non-tariff barriers, their compliances, their red tapeism. Is they are saying worse than Indian bureaucracy is red tapeism. So because this
Yeah,
question,
but Ishkaran, despite that, we have a very productive trade relationship with them. Despite all this, if the total bilateral trade is about $130 billion or whatever the figure is, it is despite all this. It's despite all this, and
no, to
now
move to the next level, because why I ask this, because for 20 years they were not doing a deal. So is it just a short term messaging to US to, in a sense, bring US to table, or is it a
no,
genuine strategic shift where they are de-risking themselves from the US sphere of influence?
well, I think that is part of it, but that's not the only part. After all, when they signed a deal with Mercosur, which was very contentious because agriculture is involved in that, it had nothing to do with distancing themselves from the United States. So I don't think we should have the narrow optic that this is for distancing themselves from the United States. In part, yes. In part, yes, because they don't want to over rely on the United States. And they know that, after all, what has Trump said very openly? That he wants to actually break up the EU. He said that. Now he wants to break up the EU. He wants to put enormous burdens on Europe on the defense side, so they buy more weapons. In the trade deal with the United States, which has gone into a limbo for the time being, what has he said? Committed Europe to 15% tariffs on you and 0% tariffs on me. You buy $750 billion of energy from me, and you'll invest $500 billion in the United States. I mean, these are the kind of pressures they are facing. So, what do? They have to look at alternatives, and they have a huge, huge, huge market in India. It's self-interest. So, I don't think it is just tactical. I think they genuinely think that they have an option here, which in any case they would have liked to exercise, even otherwise, because of the China problem.
Because, sir, if this European Union deal is a bona fide deal, that opens enormous markets, because US India sooner or later will be resolved one way or the other. And with Europe opening up, that could head a very, especially with labor, some of the things they are saying that they will onboard people from India and a bit more flexible in how they open their work visa and all. That would lead to a new era for Indian citizens, business, students who go there, etc., etc. Because US is shutting down, at least under Trump. H1B is effectively becoming dead now. So then we are in a very different world, sir.
Well, in this connection, let me say a couple of things. That when MERS came here, we had a very successful visit, and they want to open up in the areas you just mentioned, have more Indians going there, have a proper mobility from India into Germany. They recognize our talent. They want more students to come to Germany. Already, the largest number of Indian students that go to Europe are going to Germany. So they want to have deeper economic ties with us and all around. France also, uh, apart from the defense and security side, there is also a very important economic dimension. So you have two very major countries, the core of the European Union in some sense, which traditionally, at least in the case of France and Germany too, is our biggest trade partner in Europe, have been doing business with us irrespective of Brussels. Uh, Now that Brussels is on board, it will actually give a greater fillip to our own bilateral relations with European countries, especially these major ones. So, like we talk here about what is it, double engine government. So, double engine also.
True, true. True, true. Let's hope, sir, it goes like that because we do need jet engines and double and triple powered engines for Indian economy with our growing population. So let me now come straight to the irritant, that is Bangladesh, and then I want to come to serious nations as I define them. So, sir, you tweeted this that itself shows mischievous intent. He doesn't present the volume to Indian side, but to unwary foreign leaders. That is the map of Greater Bangladesh. He's no longer in power. But is that the new policy of Bangladesh now, where Greater Bangladesh is something they would use? Is Seven Sisters something they would use to try to provoke India? And what should be India's response?
Well, when I was in office, the BNP was in power. And I recall my conversations or our conversations with the Bangladesh foreign minister precisely on this subject. And he said that, you say that India encircles Bangladesh on three sides, but we encircle your northeast from three sides. He was very provocative. That's one. The other, of course, goes back to the history of the partition and the fact that at the time of the division of India, uh, Pakistan claimed Assam as part of the new East Pakistan, if you like. So they've always had their eyes on that. And then there is this whole issue of illegal migration into Assam and, of course, into West Bengal. So there's an issue there. Now, whether in this new situation where Muhammad Yunus, who was playing footsie with this idea, because he did two things. One, he made once a statement to say that we are the ocean face to Bangladesh and India's northeast. As if India's northeast didn't have access to the sea, and that the only access was through Bangladesh. And then this very mischievous thing that he was doing by publishing this book uh, and showing on the cover the a map of Bangladesh, which encompassed large parts of our northeast. And he said, well, this was graffiti on the wall. There was no intent behind it. It was a rough sketch of Bangladesh. It's nonsense. Because when he met our foreign secretary, he had this book on his lap, and he knew, of course, they were photographers. And this will appear in the Indian and Bangladesh media and international media. And then he's been presenting this book with that large map of Bangladesh to the Pakistanis, to the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff of Pakistan. Now, fortunately, he's out. But does that mean that the problem is over. Now, I would say that we should keep our thinking and our options open. Uh, the change in government, the arrival of Tariq Rahman to power in Bangladesh through elections, and the challenges that he would face internally as well as externally in relations with India, would dictate a little more sober policy. Does he want his prime ministership to be successful, or to be riddled with challenges and problems and tensions, which will affect his performance? Now, it's not as if whatever he does is going to be cost free. And if he wants to be a leader who's respected, who's stabilizing Bangladesh, who's reviving the Bangladesh economy, which is facing a lot of challenges, he has to show results. But if he challenges India on some of the core issues of this nature, then there will be an issue. On the other hand, there is the Jamaat, and there are these Islamist forces and pro-Pakistani forces who would like to use this thing in their mind about the territorial expansion and anti-Indian sentiments, to try and create problems between India and Pakistan. And even if the government is careful, there can be other voices in the larger establishment which can keep raising these issues, whereas the government can deny, saying that, look, we don't have any hand in this and this and that. So this kind of a double game can be played. But the short answer with this background, the short answer to your question is that with the many important issues to be settled between the two countries, especially the Ganga Waters, the renewal of the Ganga Waters Treaty, I think Tariq Rahman would be well advised, and the Bangladesh establishment would be well advised not to provoke India by giving vent to this kind of territorial expansionism. Look, there is another thing behind it, which is that there are a lot of external powers which would be interested in destabilizing our Northeast. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. Uh, and some of these powers, as you know, and here I would also include the United States, frankly, uh, who could perhaps not dissuade this kind of a propaganda to keep India a little bit unsteady, and use it to advantage as a pressure point, because the U.S. policy in Bangladesh has not been favorable to India's interests. The interesting thing is that the United States says that Western Hemisphere is ours. We're not going to allow any external power into the Western Hemisphere. Now, as a quid pro quo, we can say, look, our neighborhood uh, is ours, and the same logic you apply to external powers not hurting your strategic interests in your neighborhood, we can also apply to say that please don't hurt our strategic interests in our neighborhood,
But
which
so that
includes.
is my, but that is my sir, but that is my exact query, because while US says it, it acts it also. No? When it needs to, it will go into Venezuela. It has done some things in Panama Canal, etc., etc. Is saying enough if we don't act on it? While world is in a sense in an expansionist mode, should India as a regional power not think expansionist moves when it comes to Bangladesh to secure ourselves proactively? So it is not enough to talk, sir. Have we ever acted except 71, and then also it's a very controversial thing what we did after it.
Look, let's look at it in a larger perspective. In the last few years, a lot has been done by India and in cooperation with Bangladesh to overcome many of the long-standing problems between the two countries. For example, the whole issue of enclaves. We've settled that. Equally importantly, the maritime boundary. We accepted the rulings of the arbitration tribunal, even though it was not entirely in our favor. Uh, and of course, we've gone ahead and established a lot of transit linkages between India and Bangladesh, which helped both sides. So all this progress that was made on the ground during Sheikh Hasina's long tenure, should it be preserved? Should we make an extra effort to preserve it? Or we take steps which will actually negate all that has been done in the past? Now, looking ahead, and I think we should look to the long term, or at least to the medium term. I don't think it is to our advantage at this stage, at this very early stage, when we don't know how the contours of Bangladesh policy would shape up, to uh, do what you are suggesting. We can wait and then see if Bangladesh is not responsive to our core interests. uh, then we can see what needs to be done. However, there are a couple of other things we should keep in mind. One is that Bangladesh is not friend-free. It has the backing of China, and it has the backing of United States to some extent. And now that they've opened up relations with Pakistan, uh, we have another source of mischief making that can be done together with Pakistan and ISI and this and that. And then our whole Act East policy, of course, for the time being, things are not proceeding well because of instability in Myanmar, and that continues. But all our big programs, the Kaladan stuff and whatever have you, connectivity projects that we have to link us to Thailand and then further afield to Vietnam. Uh, those in the long term we should keep in mind, even if in the immediate and in the medium term, I don't know, it doesn't look as promising as we thought it would be. So keeping all this in mind, I think we also have to be a little cautious, a little cautious. And finally, we have a problem with China. We have troops that are facing each other on the border. We have this huge problem of terrorism that emanates from Pakistan, which is still a problem. And we have a field marshal there who's anti-Hindu and anti-India to the core. Uh, Bangladesh has been a problem in the past. Now, should we then increase the level of our problems in our neighborhood by trying to put the kind of pressures that we are talking about on Bangladesh, or should we, as I said, wait a little bit and see how it goes? At the end of the day, we have a lot of pressure points on Bangladesh, much more than we have with Pakistan and, of course, with China. Therefore, keep your powder dry.
Sir, I sometimes feel we wait too much and do too little. That is my only thing. But yeah, what you are saying, we have to give them time. But I'm just giving you my feeling. Sometimes our basic default nature is so pacifist as a nation that we end up waiting too often for too long, is sometimes what I feel. Because Russia does what it wants to do. US, obviously, it's a different power, does whatever it wants to do. Whereas in Bangladesh, somehow we never seem to tackle minor irritants also.
We also have our Hindu population there, which is hostage to uh, elements in fundamentalist elements in Bangladesh. As it is, that population has got reduced over time, and the more tensions that are created, the more influx of the Hindu minority into India will take place. Is that wise? Should we do it? Should we not do it? There is that kind of problem we also have. It is a bit. It inhibits us to act. So that also is an issue. At the end of the day, I would say that if look, in our new mood, the manner in which we have dealt with Pakistan, it is a major, major, major thing. It's a nuclear power. It has brandished nuclear threats against us. But we took the plunge and said, all right, this time we're going to hit them. And we hit them. It was a very bold thing that we did. Now, the mood is there, the inclination is there, the doctrine is there. So it's not as if we can't act against Bangladesh if it is required. But I suppose uh, maturity would demand that we wait and see how things pan out. Uh, be very careful. We are going out of our way actually to reach out to Tariq Rahman and the BNP. Remarkably so. Remarkably so. Uh, Apart from sending Om Birla, our speaker, uh, to the inaugural, uh, we we've invited him and his family. Prime Minister has done that to India, the first country to do so. So we made it very clear to them, very clear to them that look, we are going to forget the past. They know what our reservations are and our concerns are. That we are willing to forget the past. Let's start on a new slate. You are starting on a new slate. 17 years you were in exile. You've been given a God-given chance to come to power in Bangladesh. Use it to your advantage. And we are willing to help you. Let's stabilize our ties. Now, this is the message we are sending. If he and his entourage are willing to take advantage of this very positive move we have made towards Bangladesh, well and good. If he doesn't, then he will have a very rocky tenure.
Yes, sir. Sir, from Bangladesh now, I want to move straight to the top. Is UN dead and is Board of Peace going to be a possible replacement of it? Or it could be we are going back to the era when there was no United Nations, because it used to be called a toothless body very often. But now, is it even a body with US withdrawing so much from it? I saw one of your tweets in which you are discussing should India join the Board of Peace or not. So on both these questions, should India become a part of Board of Peace? A, and B, is UN a viable entity left? Would Board of Peace or some other form of entity now need to replace UN?
Well, insofar as as UN is concerned, I think the rest of the world has a lot of stakes in the UN, especially the global south, where there is nothing else. Otherwise, is the rule of the strong. This philosophy of might is right, which America is now is adopting as state policy. And then you have this very worrisome speech of Rubio at the Munich Security Conference, in which he's romanticizing colonialism and wants to reestablish Western hegemony, and and makes the point that the most superior civilization is the Western civilization. Now you have that challenge too, and he said also, Rubio, in his speech, that UN is doesn't function, is ineffective, which is why President Trump took the step in Gaza and elsewhere, where he tried to broker peace, etc., etc. But the point is that we've all been used over the years to United States actually working outside the United Nations on peace and security issues, when actually the core of the responsibility of the United Nations is peace and security. Now look at all the wars, whether it was Iraq war or Libyan war or Syrian war or Yugoslavia, or attacks and operations against Yugoslavia. None of that had the approval of the United Nations. And there are statements at the highest quarter from the United States to say that we'll work with the United Nations if it works with us, but if it doesn't work with us, we will take actions on our own. So this has been going on. Now, what is worrisome is a little bit something else, which is that the other parts of the UN agenda, this development agenda and other organizations of the United Nations, which have been doing good work. Now that is being affected, A, by America not paying its dues, and secondly, creating this new atmosphere where UN is being considered useless, and therefore the momentum of many of the things that the United Nations was doing on the economic front and other fronts. Now that momentum is being lost. Now it's very difficult to talk of sustainable development goals. It's very difficult to talk about the UNFCCC, this whole climate change negotiations and everything else, which are of interest to everybody. So that problem is there. Now, the other thing in this is that while United States is stepping away from the UN, who is actually gaining most from it? As it is, China had become the second largest funder of the United Nations, and they have profited a lot from the United Nations because from the platform of the United Nations, they have been able to project themselves as a power which is very different from the United States. And it has launched all these initiatives, development initiative, disarmament initiative, governance initiative, civilization initiative, and they are promoting all this in the United Nations. And they are being very effective. And they are holding now very important posts in many of the organizations linked to the United Nations. So China is going to be a big beneficiary of America's withdrawal from the United Nations, which is a problem for us. And then, before I go on to your Board of Peace, we've had aspirations to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council. The G4 met recently in the Munich Security Conference when the foreign minister was there. They had a meeting. But does it look realistic anymore? With the Americans turning their back on the United Nations to take this entire issue of expansion of the Security Council, more representation for developing countries, they're not going to take it seriously. Now you
So
come
that
to the board.
So, but that's why I was asking on UN one just last question, because its primary duty of maintaining peace in the world, it was never able to do, substantially never able to do. But its secondary thing, which was benefiting at one time nations, health initiatives, some economic initiatives, some educative initiatives, that also without money, it is unable to do. And if Chinese money comes in, then India anyways won't want it to, because it gives it a global footprint or a way inside India also. So primary you can't do, secondary you are unable to do. So what is left?
See, but there's one point, Ishkaran, that you should keep in mind. America may or may not have a interest in working in the United Nations, but other powers do. For example, for Russia, it is absolutely key that their position and their role in the UN Security Council is maintained. Otherwise, they're completely sidelined. I mean, if the UN Security Council doesn't function, then Russia is no longer in a position to protect its interests and mark its position on the international stage. So is the case of China. So for that matter, especially the case of France. Because for France, the permanent membership of the Security Council is extremely important for their prestige, for their role, because now with Britain out of the EU, the only country which is a permanent member of the Security Council is France. And that devolves on France certain international responsibilities, which no other country in Europe has. It gives them a very special position. So they're very attached to this. They want the UN to function and the UN Security Council to function. China, of course, I explained, it is deeply interested in maintaining its position in the UN Security Council. Now, Britain, well, I don't know. Let's not talk about Britain because Britain thinks it, well, I don't think it has any special relationship with the US anymore. But nevertheless, let's put that aside for the moment. Point I'm making is that there are major Western powers themselves, major powers who are interested in the survival and functioning of the UN Security Council. The entire global South is. So even if the United States turns its back, the UN General Assembly will meet, they'll pass resolutions, they'll pronounce on issues, they'll keep on doing this thing, which is a form of international pressure, even if it's not that effective on the actual policies of the United States, but it delegitimizes the policies of and the actions of the United States when these resolutions are passed and this and that. And this will go on. And let me conclude by saying, for example, this whole border peace business. It went up to the UN Security Council. Now, it is the fact that the Arab countries uh, uh, supported the border peace because they was desperate to stop Israel from pulverizing Gaza and killing the Palestinians and innocent civilians and this and that. And the only way to do was to pander to uh, Trump's ego and say, all right, you want a border peace, have your border peace, because through that we can at least come to the succor of the poor Palestinians. And Russia and China didn't want to block it, because if they had blocked it, it would have meant that Israel would have continued its rampage. So, since the Arab countries were supporting and they have interest in maintaining strong, close ties with the Arab countries, they went along, they abstained. They didn't support, they abstained. And in their national statements, they were very critical of this initiative, right? And in fact, the feeling behind the scenes was that this is not going to go anywhere. America has created this mess, so let America deal with this mess. So, uh, the Board of Peace. If you look at the way it is constituted, where Trump is the chairman of it for life, even after 3 years when he ceases to be president, he'll still remain the chairman of the board. He has, like the monarch in the medieval ages, he has the last word on everything. No matter what the board decides and its affiliated organization decide, he will ultimately decide what's right or wrong. And he will decide who will be a member, who will not be a member. He just thrown out uh, Canada from the board because of the positions Ghani took. Uh, and to my mind, what is also very worrisome is that in the board of peace, there is a mixture of state and private interests. Uh, why should people closely associated with the business interests of Trump be inside it? And if you relate this to all the plans he has, which are very real estate oriented, of reconstruction in Gaza, and the contract, who will he will decide on who will get the contracts, etc. And he's been talking about creating a Riviera there. Why would India want to get involved in this? Why would we want? We should stay away from it. And you have a person like Tony Blair. I don't mind saying it on your podcast. I mean, look at his past career. Uh, he, he he's a man many people have said who should have been tried for war crimes about what he did in Iraq, and he is a central figure in how the entire reconstruction process will
Hmm.
be organized. Uh, Now, the other thing is that Trump wants to give a mandate to the Board of Peace that goes beyond Gaza. He's talked vaguely that it can be. I heard him the other day, yesterday on television, saying it's the greatest organization ever created, and he thinks that this is going to be a place where international issues will be solved because the UN is ineffective, which is why uh, France has expressed public concern that this is an attempt to replace the UN itself, UN Security Council itself. Uh, so the concern in some quarters is that since he has this bug in his mind about India, Pakistan, and he's offered mediation, that at some stage, prodded by Pakistan or Turkey or something else, they may, who may they may put the resolution of differences between India and Pakistan on the agenda. And therefore, if we are in the border peace, we can prevent this. It is a nonsensical argument, as if I mean we were able to deal with the UN Security Council dealing with the Kashmir problem,
Hmm.
right? So why are we concerned about the border peace, which has no legal legitimacy of any kind?
So India is
So
not even, as of now, it's not taking a decision which is also expecting it to go into cold storage or die its own death, the Board of Peace.
I think our strategy is a little more sophisticated. We don't want to openly say, we're not going to, we're going to repudiate this, or we're not going to become a member, because this will hurt Mr. Trump's ego.
Hmm.
Uh, so, we're saying that we've not yet taken a decision. So I think we should keep saying that.
Sir, may I ask you a question? Has, because you use the word Trump's ego, and it's a common word now, has a leader's ego management ever been this important in the history of world, or at least in last 50 years? Is
No,
it
not
just something, or is it that we did not know about it that time because of not, lack of social media? Or is it a unique thing where ego management of the president of US is very, very important along with the substance of what you're doing?
No, I think this is the first time where a US president has openly talked about his own ego. I mean, he said the other day, you must have seen that I have a big ego. And in connection with some problem, he said it hurt my ego. And then the manner in which his entire cabinet fawns over him.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
it is embarrassing to watch. There's such senior people in the administration
Hmm.
applauding him in cabinet meetings in front of the camera, how wonderful he is, and what great chap he is, and how great things he's doing. So they're all sycophants around him. Why are they sycophants? Because they know unless they pander to his ego, they will either be out of the cabinet or they'll be marginalized. So they want to
Exactly.
actually, compete with each other to be in his good books and keep flattering him all the time. So what you are saying is very specific to the personality of President Trump. Other people took decisions, uh, hardcore decisions based on their perception of America's interests and what they thought they could achieve through use of American power. But they never brought their ego out in the open. That if you satisfy my ego, if you give me a Nobel Peace Prize, then I'll be very kind to you. I'll call you my favorite field marshal. But otherwise, I won't. No, this is unique to Trump.
Thank you, sir, for your time and covering all these varied issues, sir.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye, sir.